So anytime we're writing about a text, which happens a lot in English class and pretty frequently in history or social studies class too, we know that our teacher is going to ask us to bring in text evidence, which means that we're going to be quoting the text that we're talking about. Now, doing this is sometimes a little bit tricky, and today what I want to do is I want to talk to you about the way that you've probably been taught to do it, which is fine, but then also show you 3 new ways to incorporate text evidence. So let's take a look at how a mentor incorporates text evidence in a way that's pretty similar to the way that you probably learned to do it in English class yourself. Like Muriel Sparks' Miss Jean Brodie, EF comes across as a commanding presence and a font of pointed opinions. Neil writes, quote, "She obliged us simply by example to seek and find within ourselves a center of seriousness." So this is probably exactly how you learned to do it yourself. This is how I learned to do it when I was in school. In this example, the writer Heller McAlplin makes a point about the novel that they are reviewing. And then to prove that point about the novel they're reviewing, they add Neil writes. So the author writes, and then the textual quote. We can see here a little bit more about what Heller McAlplin is doing. There's the idea that they want to espouse about this text. There is the author's last name, and then a verb. It could be the author writes, the author states, the author shows, the author shares. And then there's a comma, which is really important. It's one of those tedious things that truly matters to separate what the writer is saying from what the text is saying. And then the quote, evidence of that idea about EF's commanding presence that comes directly from the text. The idea here, of course, is that when we pull in text evidence, we're showing that we didn't just make this up. This really is right there in front of us in black and white on the page, and we can show you where. Now, this way totally works, but I want to show you some other ways that work as well that might be a little bit more sophisticated than the Neil writes. She obliged us, right? There's that kind of choppiness there. There's a real formality to that approach. So I want to show you 3 new approaches that might help you do the same thing, but a little bit differently. The first is the FoldIn. So in the FoldIn, we do not have that break or that gap, that big pause in our voice between what we are saying and what the writer is saying, like we did in the previous example. Listen to how this sounds. Later, Christie would describe Rosalind as playing the valuable role in life of eternally trying to discourage me without success. Did you hear how there was no pause in my voice there? There was no break. There was no divide between what the writer is saying and what the text is saying. It's just folded in there together. You can see here Rosalind as playing the valuable role in life. What happens here is that you, the writer, use the text's language as your own language. And instead of stopping and saying, the author writes, quote, you just take that quote and fold it in to your own sentence. So that's option 1, the FoldIn. Option 2 is a little bit smaller, so we're going to call it the sneak in. And instead of incorporating a whole long thought, we're incorporating just a couple of words. Look at this. Ox, we're told, lives on the hem of the Atlantic, piloting yachts, setting traps for lobsters on the ocean floor, and doing other more unscrupulous work. So just like the FoldIn, there's no big division between he writes, comma, right? It's just Ox lives on the hem of the Atlantic. That quote from the text, that textual evidence is just snuck in there, a few words, not a whole thought. Now, how do we choose those few words? Well, we choose those words that the author of the text we're studying says better than we could ever say it. So when Maureen Corrigan is reviewing this particular book and she's trying to describe where Ox lives, she probably thought, the way this author writes the hymn of the Atlantic is just truly the perfect way to say this. So I'm just going to borrow the author's words. You can see how there's a little bit of a trajectory here, right? We have good, a little bit slicker and smoother, a little bit slicker and smoother still. So we have the fold in, a whole thought that's brought into our own language. We have the sneak in, which is just a couple of words that the writer says so perfectly that we couldn't think of any better words to say it ourselves, and we just sneak those into the middle of our sentence. The last strategy I want to share with you for incorporating a quote is the idea, quote. Now, this is the strategy that I found the most often, actually, as I was looking for mentor texts for our lesson today. I really didn't find many of the old school way that you and I were both taught with the he writes, comma. I saw it occasionally, but not very often. I saw the fold in pretty frequently. I saw the sneak in pretty frequently. But by far, the most frequent strategy I saw for incorporating a quote, bringing the text evidence into the argument of the paper we're writing is this strategy, the idea, quote. Now, the great news for you and me is that this is also the easiest. It really requires no weaving together. It requires almost no introduction. All you do is you state your idea about the text, put a colon, and then add a quote that shows that idea. It's very direct. It's very simple. Let's take a look at this one together from Jennifer Howard for the New York Times. We all remember how being stuck in a classroom can feel like torture. At the Institute, it is torture. Milo yelped in pain as he received a sharp pinch in the back of his neck from a pair of rubber fingers. And the quote goes on to demonstrate the torture at this school. This is such a slick, easy way that directly says to the reader, here's my idea, pay attention, I'm going to prove it. Proof, text evidence, the idea, quote from the text. So, in your writing, where are you using text evidence and you need a way to get it into your paper? Where do you think that you might want to try something a little bit different than the author writes, comma, way that you were originally taught? Can you try the idea, quote? Do you want to be a little bit smoother and slicker and take the writer's idea and use their language as your own language in your own sentences, either as a big thought with the fold in or just a couple of words with the sneak in? No matter which strategy you use, you are going to be elevating your writing by using text evidence to prove your ideas, to support your ideas. But try one of these three new strategies, the fold in, the sneak in, or the idea, quote, to just take that sophistication up a notch. Thank you so much for watching Mini Moves for Writers. Please make sure that you subscribe so that you don't miss any writing lessons.